Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I have a very important show for everyone today. With me is Jeff Brown, and Jeff Brown runs ChinaRising.puntopress.com. He's written 3 books about China. One's called 44 Days Backpacking in China. The second one's called China Rising, and the new one is called Big Red Book on China. They're all on Amazon. And Jeff, thank you for jumping on this call.
I'm really happy to meet you, Lior, and I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
Hey, I really want to explore this topic of China with you. I've been to 45 countries. China, not one of them yet.
Shame on you.
Exactly. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about China? You've lived there. You've
16 years.
Yes, you've studied it thoroughly. You're American.
Half French, half American.
Half French, half American, and you've seen both sides, so to speak. Can you jump in and talk just in general terms about how China really is in your eyes, and how Westerners see it, or are brainwashed to see it?
Well, I think you used the right word. China is one of. As far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest show on earth. It has been around for 5,000 years. They've been using the same language for 5,000 years, and they. In my second book, China Rising, I start the chapter saying, China has been communist for 5,000 years. And it really is true. They have a completely, you have to, Westerners and just have to throw everything away and start over. And I'll be honest with you, I lived in China from 1990 to 1997. And then I came back in 2010. And I lived there for 7 years from 1990 to 1997. And it didn't soak in or grab me even then. So there's a lot of solidarity. There's a lot of social solidarity, which doesn't exist in the West. It's all Marlboro Man, rugged individualism. And so there's this tremendous solidarity. There's family solidarity. There's neighborhood solidarity. There's city solidarity, there's provincial solidarity, and there's national solidarity. And so this is why China is doing so well. The other problem, as you said, is that people in the West are so brainwashed. We are brainwashed. I don't know what it's like in Israel, but in the rest of the West, in our mother's wombs, we are brainwashed about the evils of communism and the evils of socialism. And when Mao was the leader, and during his government from 1949 to 1976, the Chinese walked around, like vampires, zombies, no freedom, no voice, no nothing. Living like caged animals, and it's not true. And so the whole concept of communism and socialism, the West has wrong, and the whole concept of China is wrong, because China has always been the global trendsetter and the global leader in terms of governance, in terms of technology. They were hundreds, and in some cases, 1,000 to 1,200 years ahead of Europe in agricultural technology. In fact, without China, without the West taking all of China's agricultural technology and using it in Europe, they would have never even had the Industrial Revolution. They couldn't have done it. They couldn't have fed their people. So they have always been the trendsetter. They have always been way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of governance and technology, innovation, et cetera. except for 1839 to 1949, when the West, was raping and pillaging and plundering, the planet, from 1402 in the Canary Islands up until, I still think today. And so they, but differently, but so for 110 years, the West raped and pillaged and plundered China, and they pushed illegal drugs, opium, and then in the 19th century, morphine in the early 20th century, and up in the 1930s, after heroin was invented, they pushed heroin into China. So they had about 1/4 of the entire people were on hard drugs. Can you imagine that? I mean, can you imagine walking around Tel Aviv and 25% of the people are hard drug addicts? So this is what China was like until Mao took over and the communists took over in 1949. And unfortunately, and to the peril of the West, this is the China they're thinking about. They're thinking about this weak China, the sick man of Asia, copycat everything, blah, 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 robots, robot communists who can't even, who are afraid to say good morning, because they might get killed. They might get assassinated. This is just the worst propaganda. And so now, after 1949, Mao got rid of the century of humiliation, that 110 years. And in spite of what the West wants to say, China started its march in 1949, and it hasn't stopped. Not when Deng Xiaoping took over in 1978 and started his reforms and opening up, which Mao was already doing anyway. And so China has been on the march since 1949, and they are unstoppable. And so basically, we're now back to the China of the Tang and Song dynasties, the West can't compete. That's my opening statement.
So obviously, this description and the description that people learn about is very different. So I'd love to know, okay, let's take a city like Shanghai or Beijing, cities that are, in the tens of millions, mega cities. Talk about how life is there. What is it? Is it westernized? Can you say that word? Is it very modern? I understand that in China, they don't use cash or credit cards. They have the WeChat. They have magnetic levitation trains that take them to work, even if they live hundreds of kilometers away from work. What is China? What is it? Not what it is not.
Well, China, I really loved having the opportunity to be in China from 1990 to 1997, when it was just what I like to call the Deng Xiaoping Wild East Buckaroo days, and it was just neoliberal capitalism. It was a jungle. It was still socialist and communist, but they just let the economy just go. I mean, at the street level, they still all major industries and everything, but at the street level, at the the community level, they just let the people make money. And so there was a lot of, my wife and I used to joke about it. I used to say, living in China in 1990 to 1997 was like a 5-pack a day Nat King Cole, cigarette nicotine habit. The hooks were in us. It was so exciting and so wild and so unimaginably, it was like a rush of some kind of drug. And so that's what we had for 7 years after Tiananmen. Then we left, came back in 2010, and my wife and I got out. First off, the airport that we left in was no longer there, and we were in this incredibly beautiful airport in Beijing, and we're like metros and buses and highways and I mean, it just gardens and flowers and trees everywhere. I mean, we recognize stuff, you know. I mean, there was still stuff there, but it was just hyper developed. And our 14-year-old daughter was with us, who actually spent her first 6 months in China, and so we were just absolutely blown away by the organization, the planning, the quality of life. I mean, the quality. I'm sorry, Lior. I've never, you know, I was in Tel Aviv back in the '80s, but the quality of life in China is way ahead of anybody even here for us here in France. It is such a pleasure to live in China. And I mean, they've got, for example, we were in Beijing from 2010 until 2016, and then we went to Shenzhen on the border, south, across the border from Hong Kong. And I mean, you just have to go there and see it to believe it. You know, they've got, you know, 1,000 bus lines. This Beijing or Shenzhen, they're about the same, although Beijing is much bigger in area. They've got, each of them have over 1,000 bus lines that cost nothing. I mean, pennies. They've got, each city has 70 to 80,000 taxis that are quite reasonable. Each city, and this goes for Shanghai, this goes for Guangzhou, this goes for Chongqing, and this even goes for second-tier cities like Tianjin and Chengdu and Xi'an and Heilongjiang and many of the others. They've got incredible metro systems. I mean, just amazing. And none of this was here when we left in 1997. None of that was even here. Shenzhen I was in Shenzhen in the 90s. It was an awful place, you know, and it was just full of, you know, fast eddies and, you know, hustlers and prostitutes and everything. And we come back and it's just like, what is going on here? And so that's what, so it's just the internet, telephones, infrastructure, public transportation, airports, highways, toll roads, bridges. It's just amazing. It's unbelievable. And so that's what got me to writing my first book. I thought, okay, we're in Beijing. We came back and we were just gobsmacked at what we were looking at. And I told him, I said, honey, I've got to get out and see what, because we had visited most of the provinces back in the 90s, most of them. And I mean, in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere, in most of them. And I said, you know, I've got to get back out and see what's going on. And I said, is this just Beijing, or is the rest of the country like it? Can the rest of the country be like this? And so the summer of 2012, we got here in 2010. She and my daughter, for that matter, kindly allowed me to take a 40-something day journey, and I trimmed it down, the book down to 44 days. And but I went to some other places too. And I expressly went to 5 of the poorest regions in China. I mean, the 5 poorest regions in China. And I would get off the bus or I would get off the train. I never took a plane. I either, you know, just trains and buses. And everywhere I went, my jaw was just dropping everywhere I went. These are poor cities, supposedly poor regions. And they were just humming. I mean, they were just smoking with activity and economic prosperity and the people and the business and the commerce and the roads and internet everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I mean, I would be in the middle of the mountains and there would be internet. And so I went to Ningxia, which is a Muslim area. I went to Gansu, which is a Muslim Tibetan area. And then I went into the Tibetan plateau in Sichuan, and went down through there. And then I went into Yunnan, which is also supposedly poor. And then I went over into Guizhou, which is supposed to be one of the poorest in the country. And everywhere I went, I mean, and by the time I got finished with my trip, I mean, a month and a half later, I was just like, I was writing the whole time, talking to people on the street, because I speak Chinese, talking to people from all walks of life. And I thought I was just going to start a blog. And then when I got back, I already had 50,000 words written. And I said, this is a book. And so I ended up writing 44 days based on what I saw in those five supposedly poor provinces. So it is the greatest show on earth. It is, and I miss it terribly. I'm so homesick, and I'd love to go back. I went back in December, but now with COVID, who knows? But I would love to go back as soon as the COVID thing lifts, and we don't have to go through the 14-day quarantine and all that crap.
Jeff,
so yeah, it's amazing.
I want to ask you a few things. I want to ask you a few things about comparing governments between the United States and China. Obviously, people have an idea about what is the CCP, and they think they have an idea about the U.S. government. Nowadays, people are much more aware that the U.S. government has, that not everything that is is what it is. It
has issues. It has issues.
It's interesting. It's almost, in countries that have been through rough episodes with the government, there's a healthy distrust of government, and in countries where there hasn't been some sort of, there's a naive view of government. Government is for you. Government is always going to tell you the way it is, etc., etc. I almost don't know what's better to live in, where the government is kind of, it has its issues, or where you're just living inside of this bubble. But can you talk about your experience with both these governments?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Well, I'll just leave the U.S. off. Well, but the U.S. and the U.S. and Europe, and I include Israel in this, Australia, New Zealand. I call it Eurangloland, and I think most of the democracy that is and freedom of press and freedom of expression and free markets, it is a mirage. But I can talk about Chinese democracy, and people go, here's the other problem. Here's the other problem with the West. They only think there's only one kind of democracy. There's all kinds of different democracies, all different kinds. And China has communist socialist democracy. Communist socialist democracy is bringing the power to the people. I mean, the Black Panthers, Black Panther Party is the vanguard party, and power to the people, and because they were socialist also. So that China has a vanguard party. A socialist country has to have a vanguard party, because if it doesn't, it will be destroyed by the West. It will be absolutely destroyed by the West. So the West has been trying to destroy every socialist and communist and anti-imperialist country in the world since 1917, since the Russian Revolution. That's all we do, is try to destroy, invade, subterfuge, color revolutions, war, etc. Anybody that's a socialist or a communist government or anti-imperialist today with Russia has a huge target on its back. So if you want to survive as a socialist country and a socialist and a communist democracy, you have to have a vanguard party. You have to have a big badass party to protect the country, to protect the country's borders, and to protect the people, because otherwise they're going to end up looking like Indonesia. or or Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Colombia, a drug, gangster drug land. And so you have to have a vanguard party. One of the reasons that Mao, people think, oh, the Great Leap Forward was a disaster. Oh, the Cultural Revolution was a disaster. They weren't. They were the greatest implementations of direct democracy in the history of the world. He basically took democracy down to the level of the neighborhood everywhere all over China. With 1 billion people, it got a little bit rowdy. Let's face it, it got a little bit rowdy, and he always had to come back and kind of grab back, some of that people's democracy, because it was just at times unmanageable. So they always had to come back to the CPC to keep things in order. So China has tremendous democracy, and so this is propaganda brainwash number one that people don't want to believe. China has tremendous democracy. You can say that even during Mao's time, you could say whatever you want if it was done constructively, and you go talk to your village council or whatever. But to hold up a sign on Tiananmen Square and say that Xi Jinping is an asshole is not considered to be constructive. It's not considered to be useful for society. So, but people are constantly there. I mean, there's Mao haters and Mao lovers, Xi haters and Xi lovers, Deng haters and Deng lovers. There's neoliberals. There's radical communists. I mean, there is everything in between, and it's extremely lively, extremely vibrant, and extremely consensual. They will not pass a bill. They will not pass a law if the CPC is the biggest polling organization in the world. They poll hundreds of millions of people a year, and if the people are really, really, really against a law, they'll table it, and they will talk to the people and amend it and everything. The Patriot Act in the United States, the Patriot Act in France, were we consulted? No, but in China they are, for face recognition, for voice recognition, all these sticky, personal information gathering. All of this is shared with the people, and they all have an input. And so now with the internet, millions of people go online and they express themselves through all the government portals, Shenzhen, and their town council and all that. So they do have a very vibrant, consensual, participatory democracy, which the West doesn't, I'm sorry to say. So I think and that's why they have the highest citizen satisfaction ratings and levels in the world. And it's not Chinese, it's Pew Trust. It's Pew, the British American polling company. The Chinese have the highest satisfaction of their government. They have the highest satisfaction of the way their country's being run, and they have the highest level of anticipation and positiveness about their future. And unfortunately for the West, 80-something% of them are ready to join the army to fight the West if the West has a battle with them. That's also been polled. And it's like 30% in the U.S. and 20% in Europe. So they're proud. They're patriotic. They have a very vibrant, very noisy social culture, and again, they don't consider calling Trump an asshole on Twitter that's not constructive. But if you go to the town council and say I'd like to talk about this and this and this, I guarantee you the CPC will put that in their big data in these days and age. In their big data machine and come up with ideas for the future. So it's an amazing place to see, and it's safe, and My daughter lived there, you know, from 8th grade all the way through high school. Actually, one of them, I'm sure she just graduated from college. She was in Beijing. She just graduated from Beijing Normal University. She could go out at midnight to 2 in the morning, never have to worry about being raped or robbed or anything. Contrary to what the West thinks, you go to Tiananmen Square, the cops don't even have guns. You know, they don't even wear guns. Most of the cops, they don't even have them. I mean, well, they're in the cars, you know, but they don't walk around like here in France, where they look like you know, video game, robots, you know, like they do here in France and elsewhere. So I just, you know, it's an amazing place, and unfortunately, it's kind of game over for the West. I mean, other than they're trying every which way to kill China, they're trying everything. They're doing everything they can to destroy China, and their allies, China's allies, are doing everything they can to destroy the Belt and Road Initiative. They're sabotaging, you know, projects for the Belt and Road Initiative all over Asia and Africa. But they can't stop them. I mean, they have a vision and they have a dream, and nothing's going to stop them short of World War III. And let's hope it doesn't come to that, Lior.
Okay, well, you know what? That is sort of my next question, my final question. Where is this United States versus China war on all levels? Currency war, technology war, capital wars, maybe a physical war, tariff, trade wars. Where is this going? Because obviously China's growing faster than the United States is growing. It's going to surpass it in terms of GDP by 2025 or 2027. It's going to have a bigger military budget by 2035. I mean, it's pretty common to say that China is going to be the ruler of the 21st century. So what do people in China, how do they see this battle for supremacy? They think it's a battle for supremacy? Do they think it's
no? They don't. And
a coexistence, etc.? Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's more like it. Well, to be honest, Lior, even the World Bank and the IMF came out in 2000, and The Economist and the Financial Times back in 2000, late 2014, early 2015, came out and said that China had already surpassed the United States in purchasing power parities GDP, because you can't compare, you know, how much a pound of meat costs in Switzerland versus, you know, Botswana or whatever. So you have to, you know, comparing currency exchange, GDP
Understood.
Based on currency exchange,
of course,
is completely fallacious. And so China's already had the biggest economy for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's just growing bigger. And now with Europe and the rest of the West tanking because of the COVID hysteria, and China barely missed a beat, they're going to just literally just completely overtake the United States. The other interesting thing is that China builds things. They build roads, they build bridges, they build ports, they build canals, they build airports, they build metros. So their GDP is much more. It's a nicer GDP. You know, they don't have 1,000 military bases around the world. They're not invading, countries all over the world. They're not occupying countries all over the world. So their GDP is much more beneficial to the human race. And I don't know what to tell you, Laura. I mean, it's game over. I mean, there's no way. You just have to spend a month in China just looking around and at least have an open mind about what you're looking at, and maybe read my book or books, to understand how the government works and everything else, and how the democracy works. It's over. I mean, it's just, they are back where they were, 1,000 years ago, before 1839, before the United States, well, not back then, but before Europe, set off and raped and plundered and enslaved most of the rest of the world. And so I don't know, how this is going to spell out. I don't know, because at some point, I'm a member. Well, actually, I head a China writers group. There's about 20 of us in this group. We're all in some way interested and write about and China. And the latest one was the United States crushed Huawei's chip buying or chip manufacturing capacity by sanctioning even 38 more third-party chip suppliers, basically choking off Huawei's ability to buy U.S. content microchips. And I kind of said, in fact, I just did it before our show. I said, when is the United States going to react, like do something against Apple? I mean, how long are they going to take this? And I call the government in China Baba Beijing, because it's a very paternalistic society. And I said, when is Baba Beijing going to, maybe react a little bit? And a couple of them wrote back and said, don't worry about it, man. They've got 1.4 billion. They've got a market of 1.4 billion people. They've got money. They've got disposable income. They've got jobs. The economy's humming. Everything's just going forward. And so they said they're just it's just one more. What do they call that? A knot, in the lynch for the West. They're just digging themselves. The West is just burying itself in its fanatical, psychopathic attempts to destroy communist socialist China and the DPRK and Cuba and Iran and Venezuela and Eritrea and Africa and all these other and Russia, the anti-imperialist Russia. They're spending more time trying to destroy these countries than they are, trying to do something good for the human race. So, but the fear is that there's a lot of trigger happy psychopaths in NATO who would love to bomb Russia and Iran and China and the DPRK with nuclear weapons. I mean, they've been wanting to do that for the last 70 years, and so that's what worries me, is that at some point, they're just going to get so there'll be no other option to try to save Western global, capitalism, which is basically a, gangster, piracy. There's just no other. I'm just worried. That's what scares me. Or if the dollar implodes, if there's a run on the dollar, they may feel like they only have one other choice, and that's just is a hot war. And I'm sorry, Washington and Paris and London and everybody and Canberra in Australia. If you all attack China, it won't even be a contest. Their military technology is now so advanced, and it's as big as Canada or the United States. Where do you start? And so, other than a nuclear war, and if they do that, then that's the end of the human race. So that's what scares me, and I think we should all be concerned. And it's not Trump. I mean, this has been going on since 1917 with the Russian Revolution. I mean, this has just been building up to destroy socialism, destroy communism, destroy anti-imperialism. Now, unfortunately, now China's the biggest, baddest, richest, most technologically advanced, communist kahuna on the face of the earth, and they can't be beat. They got Soviet Union collapsed, but China is like a 8,000-ton gorilla. And if they attack China, it'll be just like the spirit of Mao Zedong will be there, and the West will lose unless they just bomb it to oblivion. And then at that point, goodbye Tel Aviv, goodbye Paris, goodbye London, goodbye Washington, and goodbye the rest of the world.
Jeff, very interesting observations, and I want to get a recap from you about your three.
Okay.
If people want to go on Amazon and purchase either of your books or all of them, what can they expect from each of these?
Well, 44 Days is a socio-cultural, political journey across China, and it was my awakening about China. And so it's a lot of culture, a lot of history, and a lot about, you know, and I made some mistakes. I mean, I made some historical mistakes in there about Mao, and because I was still, you know, hadn't done enough research, and so that one's sort of socio-cultural, the society and the culture. China Rising, I realized that I could not really understand China and the Chinese people and their amazing 5,000-year civilization until I understood my own country, and that was the United States and the West. And so, surprisingly, the book China Rising, Capitalist Roads, Socialist Destinations is actually the first 100 and something pages is all about the West. It's all about what I finally, it was sort of my, God, this is what the West is really like. So I stripped away all of my illusions and all of my idealizations and all of my racism and all of my brainwashing, as you say. We are so brainwashed. It is just beyond, you don't see it until you get outside of it. I call it the Great Western Firewall, and I call it the big lie propaganda machine. And so I took a really disturbing look at the West, going back at least to the 1500s, the 1400s, I'm sorry. And then the rest of the book kind of compares where the West was coming from, and the last 3/4 of China Rising is about China and the society and the culture and the people and the politics and the Communist Party and just a whole bunch of different viewpoints. So then I realized I still wasn't quite there, and so Big Red Book on China is a, I mean, if that's the one book you want to buy me, that's the one to buy, Big Red Book on China, because it really, I took everything I knew about China and I did thousands of hours of research, and I really got into the nitty gritty of how the National People's Congress works, how the Communist Party works, how the People's Consultation Conference works, how Chinese democracy works, the voting from the villages up to the national level, how, you know, this and this. I really get into the nuts and bolts about Chinese governance, and especially how China was governed from 1949 when the communists took over until the present. I get into Mao, Deng, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, the two presidents, presidents between, and then Xi Jinping. So Big Red Book on China is almost like, you know, people say it's, you know, it should be a textbook in colleges because it is so, it really, really, really lays out what the Chinese have gone through to get where they are today. And I cover infrastructure and everything. It's quite comprehensive. And it's got 100 and something pictures in it. So it's also, you know, visual. And so that's it. It's I'm not Jeff Brown. I'm not the guy who wrote Flat Stanley. If you have children, you may know about Flat Stanley. I'm Jeff J. Brown. But if you just go in and put Big Red Book on China or China Rising, there's a bunch of 44. You have to put 44 days backpacking to get the book. But I do have an author's page Once you find one of my books, you can go to my authors. I even wrote a book. I even have a book available on how to learn English. And I have another book I wrote that's bigger than all of these, but I never published it. And now I've got my new book coming out. Hopefully, I was hoping December, but I doubt it. I'm just going to go in and really talk about China now, about the 21st and the 22nd century and where they're heading. Because that's where they're thinking. They're already thinking about the 22nd century. They already are, and so that's how far out they think, and that's why they're kicking the West's ass across the global stage.
Jeff, thank you very much for doing this, and really a very knowledgeable and a very interesting point of view. And that's what the show is about, getting all the points of view across and letting people judge for themselves. And I really appreciate your time.
Lior, are you going to do you put this on YouTube?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, please send me the link, and then I will promote you and send me information about your website and